Ready?
And some people are. Want to talk, but others are like, here, let's sit down, if you would, sit on their porch.
There was some really good costumes.
Who was looking, did you say?
The mummy.
She's
Sorry.
Mr. Sanders, 2 minutes away. Two stoplights.
Okay, I'm gonna open the meeting with a call to order. All commissioners are present except Commissioner Sanders, who's expected in a few moments. Would Mr. Isle, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have approval of the agenda? A motion to approve. Okay, Commissioner Montana makes a motion and Commissioner Evans Harding has seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we have an agenda. And with that, we have the Thurston Regional Planning Council Peninsula Master Plan update, and I think someone must be here from the TRPC.
Yes,
Do you want to lead us through this, Mike?
I will happily. So before we kick into it, I would like our guests from TRPC just to introduce themselves so you know who you're talking to. And then we're gonna trade off parts of the presentation that will guide you through. So with that.
Well, good afternoon. For those who don't know me, I'm Allison Osterberg. I'm currently the interim executive director for TRPC. I've been in that role since about June, since Mark Daly left, for folks who worked with Mark. And when I'm not interim executive directoring, I'm the planning manager for TRPC. And I'll hand it over to Paul.
Good evening, commissioner, staff, community members, and folks online. When I'm not the interim planning manager, I am a senior planner at the council. 10 years ago, I was much more of a regular here in front of the Port Commission. I led the community engagement process for the Tumwater New Market Industrial Campus, Tumwater Town Center master planning process. I'm back. Couldn't get enough of the port. So
Thank you.
So with that, so I'm Mike Reed. I'm your Community and Economic Development Director, and I am tasked as the staff sort of lead and liaison on this Peninsula Master Plan project. A couple of things that you're going to hear today. You may feel a little bit of deja vu of we've had this conversation a little bit, but the reason we're doing that is TRPC, who's going to be a lead partner in this project with us, may not have heard what the commission's thoughts or opinions are on some of these things. So, but we hope most of the conversation is covering new ground, but there might be a couple of moments where you're like, yeah, we've touched this before. It's okay. It's just going to be the new ground for us on this. What I want to talk about first, and you'll see the room does look a little bit different today, because I have brought examples that you can see in front of you of conceptual land use plans. And if I wasn't concerned that it would be very difficult to get us all under control and back to the table, I would take a break and allow us to go look at these and ask questions, because there really are some fun pieces and elements. Some of these plans, I think, date back to the 60s or 70s. But they have been guiding tools for us. I'm going to just illustrate a couple very quickly. And John, I may need you to pick up one and show one for me. So right in the center, that is actually the land use plan that and the sort of layout that was done for our 1994-95, what we called then a comprehensive plan. That was the land use plan that we actually did an environmental impact statement on. And we have since been amending that plan ever since. So it's interesting because there's a lot of pieces that actually came to fruition out of this plan and some pieces didn't. And you can see if you look closely as an example, we were all just looking at it. The farmer's market was on this plan 2 years before the farmer's market showed up across the street. So they were planning for this. And then on the far end, after the meeting's over, do take a look. There's a drive of the farmer's market from 1994, I believe. Farmer's market didn't open until 1996. So it is a conceptual design of this. Why am I telling you this? I am telling you this because good planning exercise leads to the outcomes that we as a community want to see. And it gives us as staff the roadmap to be able to implement the community vision that is articulated through you as the community. So we get farther, faster when we have the plans that we can enact and work off. So that's why we're doing this. It's been a long time since we've done this for the peninsula. Really the last time we took this kind of an undertaking was associated with this 1995, 94, 95-ish plan. So, and I still think that there's stuff in that plan worth examining or re-examining. So we'll circle back on that. So why is this beginning now? Let me move to the next slide. You don't have to read off of my notes. We have done some visioning exercises, both in the Vision 2050 and Destination Waterfront. Those are visions. They give us guidance in terms of what we think we want to see, but we haven't folded them into traditional land use plans. They haven't been folded into our comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements or development guidelines, and the actual the rigorous documents that we use from a planning. So Vision 2050 and Destination Waterfront are more operating in that vision space, not an application space. And so we want to take that work and continue to work off of it and move it towards a land use standpoint. We want to strengthen readiness for the future economic development opportunities. We want to modernize the environmental review, as I touched on. The EIS that was done for that one here was done in 1994. It is time for a new one. We accept that. We are going to develop a plan that we can do that off of. And so that is the desired end state of this work, is a new environmental impact statement for the peninsula properties. Additionally, we want to position the port for proactive coordinated development. When we can communicate what a win looks like to a potential partner that we're going to look like or work with, it removes the rug pull that can happen.
Excuse me.
Bless you. So bottom line, it's time to turn these visioning exercises that we've done into long-term actionable plans. There we go.
Sorry.
Okay, it's all right. There's going to be a couple of questions that we want you to ponder as we're giving this presentation. And there will be commission discussion. We can do some of that today. We also recognize that not everybody's brain processes the same way. We are all different. Sometimes it takes me longer to process information, so my ability to respond and react right immediately after being presented information, I don't always operate that way. So what we will be doing is we're going to be presenting some information, planting some seeds for some conversations, and TRPC will be following up with you individually with some interviews. The kinds of questions that we anticipate TRPC to be asking and working with you are articulated up here. So what defines a successful and readiness sort of plan for implementation? What do you think about in that role as the policy maker for the port? What sort of validating of the policy foundation does there need to be, if any? And what are those guiding principles? And then finally, setting priorities, what outcomes matter most in the development of a Port Peninsula master plan. So you don't need to answer those questions now, but we do want you, as we are presenting this information, as we're going through, kind of let that sit back there and we'll work on getting that information. I am not gonna talk about TRPC's expertise because they're sitting next to me. I will let them tell that story themselves.
Thank you. That's a great setup, Mike. And great to be here tonight to talk about this project. I think this is a really excited for the partnership with the port on this work. This is kind of diving into work that TRPC has done in the past. And I think that we get really, these are the kinds of projects that we get really excited about internally. So I know we have some folks who've worked very closely with TRPC and are on our council, on our transportation policy board. But for those of you who are less familiar with us, TRPC has been around for nearly 60 years. So not as long as the port, but for some time. And throughout that history, our agency has always been put in that place of facilitating conversations, discussions, working through difficult community challenges that cross boundaries. And so looking at land use issues, transportation issues, environmental issues, and where we as a region with all these different entities have to kind of work together to think long-term about the future and what our needs are in our community and then how we get there. So we've done throughout our history, many partnered with the port and cities and the county and other entities on all kinds of planning work. We've got a lot of experience doing project management, a lot of experience in gathering data. So we've got a big data team that has a lot of expertise with GIS and modeling work and pulling data together. We have a lot of experience in facilitating conversations, just thinking about who needs to be a part of a discussion. How do we move from gathering that input to kind of summarizing what that means and identifying ways to move forward. And we don't have a ton of expertise in everything because we're a small shop as well, but we do a lot of work with outside consultants and managing how do we bring different kinds of experts to bring the expertise that we need to get to the outcome we need. So when Mike and Alex first reached out to us about potentially partnering with the port on this work, we were really excited because it just is a project that I think speaks to what we like to do at TRPC and what our expertise is, which is just helping our partners in the region think about the future and build the pathway and the constituency to get there. So that's why I think what we bring to the table.
Clicker's not working, Missy.
It's turned on, right?
It is on. Let's see. All right.
There you go.
So we've had some initial, thank you so much, had some initial discussions with support staff and have started looking through some of the background materials that Mike highlighted. And so I want to be clear that we're going to present some concepts tonight. They're really early, we're in real early days here as far as our work. And as Mike said, many of you have been through a lot of these discussions already. And so we're really the newest to the game on this. So anything we're presenting tonight, I want to just emphasize that it's sort of our understanding so far. And we're really looking for feedback from you, and we'll be looking for input from a lot of partners to inform that going forward. But as far as what we see is that our goal in moving forward through this process together is to think about how do we position the Port Peninsula and all the different kinds of land uses on it. How do we position that in the future for long-term competitiveness, resilience, and community benefits? So trying to hit all those different needs. We want to align your different plans that you've already developed. So things like Vision 2050 and Destination Waterfront, which set these visions with practical rules that guide what happens on the Port Peninsula. So things like the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements. Want to have all those plans consistently saying the same things at a high level and then down in the nitty-gritty as well. That we understand what you want is to create a predictable, efficient permitting pathway so that it's just clear what can happen where and reduces those questions. And that there's a desire to build and sustain community trust and support for what the port is doing on the Port Peninsula. And so those are all things that what we've heard so far in these initial discussions are things that we've. Oh, perfect. So we wanted to work through a little bit of who's on first, to throw a baseball metaphor out there in this project. The Port of Olympia will stay as the sponsor of this project and the ultimate decision maker. You'll be the lead with working for the tenants that are on the port property, coordinating with, this is one of many projects that the port is working on. So whether that's a sea level rise response plan or things that are happening out in the water areas around the port, those are things we're less involved in, but we'll be working with the port to coordinate and make sure that that information is informing this project when it needs to. And our role is really to lead on managing the project, leading engagement with community partners, and coordinating any consultancy for their delivering what we need. Important other partners that'll be part of it will have to be working early and throughout this process with the city of Olympia, since they're the lead on permitting, or leave for permitting and have that permitting authority, and will need to be a co-lead on any environmental impact statement that's developed. And then we'll be bringing, as mentioned, different consultants on throughout the process to help with technical expertise, and we'll be bringing the community on also to inform the vision, the values, the priorities that are ultimately plan.
I don't know why it's not working. All right, is this the next one?
Yep, we're on the next one. All right, and so kind of where we're at right now. So earlier this year, we signed a master interlocal agreement with the Port of Olympia, and that set up the expectation that we'll be doing more over time as needed. And what we have right now is the first task under that master interlocal agreement is to do the scoping for this project. So we'll be working on developing a scope of work for the master plan. And part of that's an initial $50,000 task order that you have under that. And a lot of that is for us is coming up to speed with all the work that's already been done. So reviewing those existing plans, the resources, all the data that's already out there, and putting all of that together. Working with you all and other community partners to really get a sense of what is the geographic scope of this project. What's the extent we're talking about? Identifying the key stakeholders and having that inform the scope, and working with the commissioners individually and also collectively to understand your priorities. And ultimately what we're looking to is to develop a very detailed scope of work that's going to outline what are all the different pieces we need to get to that master plan. And that's something we'd be looking to bring back to you early next year for review and to flesh out what needs to happen in the next stages.
What's the goal for this wrapping up? Like, when you say we'll start early next year, when would it be finished?
What did we say, Paul?
For a scope of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're hoping to get back to you by second quarter next year.
Yeah.
With the scope of work?
To say, here's how this project's going to proceed.
And then when would the project be complete?
We're so early into it, I can't say that.
And that's part of it. It is a kind of a long lead up time for the scope of work. And I think the reason for that is that we want to really understand what all those pieces are and what's going to be in and what's going to be out of it, and get a good sense of what, for example, what kinds of technical expertise will we really need to inform this project. And so a lot of the work that we might put into a project later, we're going to be doing in this upfront scoping work.
I will say this, I know the response of, oh my gosh, this is like a 2-year planning process. Every one of those was probably about a 2-year planning process.
Problem is, we're already 2 years into this.
I understand
So-
that, and we did make a conscious change about the approach associated with the project. So that there is There is there's a price to be paid to do I think what was a necessary course correction to bring TRPC on board.
Yeah, Missy, can you?
Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah, I don't know why I'm having issues. I'm sorry. I'm having issues with myself.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I think this one's me.
Who doesn't?
Oh, I'm gonna hand it back to
Yeah.
Mike.
There you go. So from a policy foundation, we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but these plans and policies are the groundwork for this. So we do have support documents, the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements, Vision 2050, Destination Waterfront, and then there's also other historic planning documents. The 1995 comprehensive plan, as it was called then, and then got converted into the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements, it is still a plan of record. And its thumbprint is still felt on us today. That was the document that created the named districts that we have, Farmers Market District or the East Bay District. Those were things that sort of came out of that plan. It is also the last plan that had an environmental impact statement associated with it. So it is still an informing document. We also have other regional plans that play into this. We don't have 100% control of our own property. Part of it does apply to the city of Olympia. So city of Olympia has land use plans themselves and comprehensive plans. For example, what we call the Marine Terminal District is the only large piece of industrially zoned property in the city of Olympia. So the city of Olympia has put the overlay for the zoning over that piece of property. And so there is this interplay with the city about their zoning and their comprehensive plan, and we do not want to run afoul of that. I think an illustrative example of what happens when you try that, there was an attempt to put an RV resort park out there. That is not allowed in the city of Olympia's comprehensive plan. And they said, no, we do not want to amend our plan to accommodate that. So folding in what their uses and their goals are into our plans and making sure that the relationship is strong so that if we do need to amend things or change things, that they have been a part of this iterative process to reach those outcomes.
How do you involve them?
We will be engaging them first from a staff perspective, but I do think that one of the concepts, and this will be developed in the scope, is to develop a technical advisory committee and bring their technical expertise onto that committee. It's similarly, we just got invited, the city of Tumwater is looking at doing a planned action EIS for the brewery, and they will develop a technical advisory committee associated with that and invited us to add our expertise to that conversation. It would be in the same sort of manner that I would imagine something like that would work with the city of Olympia. So you can see here also on the left-hand side, that's the Vision 2050. That was unanimously approved by the then sitting commission. I think that one would have been Commissioner Zeta, Commissioner Downing, and Commissioner McGregor unanimously approved that. So that is still a document of record for us that gives us the vision and the guidance to move forward. They also unanimously adopted a motion advancing the destination waterfront planning as well. So that's still an informing document for us. On the right-hand side, in 2017, they adopted Resolution 2017-03, which is what we call the Port of Olympia Planning and Governance Pyramid. And that is putting all of our policy and governance documents in an illustrative way. This is still on record and we still use this. What was that?
I would invert that pyramid and put the public on the bottom. It's a weird. I think it's the inversion of what I would think our planning and governance would look like.
In terms of its like weighting, it looks like it's weighted.
Yeah, I would think it would come from the public to the commission priorities through the annual budget to the staff, you know. You're the executive director, kind of, it's a strange pyramid for me to see.
Okay.
Glad to know we formally adopted it some years ago.
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to see that far away, but
Well, I think the tip of the spear is commission, community stakeholders, so I think it's just maybe the way it's worded.
How you think of it,
Um,
yeah.
Because the little thing on the right, like our mission, vision and values should be coming from.
From the public.
feedback From the public.
that's
Okay.
what that's
Um,
saying.
I just usually think of with a pyramid, the base is, the
It's the
foundation.
biggest.
Oh, and I
Oh.
think that's actually, it's the opposite. It's sort of, it flows downhill.
Right.
Instead of building upon it. So maybe the design is the factor. I don't think that the intent is.
Yes.
I think the intent is the same as to what, but anyways, there has been some organizational institutional memory loss over the last number of years, trying to bring in some of these commission adopted foundational documents that are informing is part of the intent.
I think it's helpful that you're bringing back these things because we either need to use them or get rid of them.
Get rid of them.
Right. So I
They're
think,
on the record.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that you're doing that.
So with that, I'm gonna hand over to Paul, who's going to discuss sort of what's in and out and boundaries associated with the project. I don't know if your pointer will work.
Okay. I appreciated the look on your face, the jaw dropping when we talked about. I just want to add some context. To do an analogy, this Port Peninsula Master Plan is a marathon. And we're walking to start to get in shape to run that race. That's where we're at. And to plan effectively, we really have to be deliberate in understanding what all the needs of the study are. And we're starting with you. We haven't really gone out to the community at large and started talking with anybody. First base is the port commissioners, or the top of the pyramid, so to speak. And so tonight, everything I'm going to be presenting to you is perspective. It's what are the possibilities? What is sort of the track, sort of the checklist of all the types of planning activities that should go into a sub area study? And so when we talk about the sub area, we're talking about the Greater Bud Inlet, Olympia Port Peninsula property. And so here's a map. Marine terminal in the gray. It doesn't look like the laser pointer is working so well on the screen. All of the urban waterfront sites that Thomas Architecture Studios worked with the vision or with the destination waterfront are marked there with the letters. And then the color shading is for zoning. We have industrial, urban waterfront, and other. So
are we talking about all these letters, A through?
yeah, so we're talking about the urban waterfront, which would be all those letters. What would be nice is another map would be this, another way to look at it would be this hand-drawn map up in front of the room that shows from the 1995 comprehensive plan of all the port districts. So what we're talking about, what's in, what we're proposing, what we think is what's in, is the Port Peninsula districts. The marine terminal, that's new. The destination waterfront didn't look at that. That was out for destination waterfront. We're putting it in. North Point, the Market District, and the Swan Pound Marina and Boatworks District. We think it's important to look at the multimodal transportation utility networks and focusing on what parts of the Port Peninsula where it specifically interfaces with downtown Olympia.
Love that.
I think for a lot of people, they look at the Port Peninsula as downtown Olympia. And the Port of Olympia and its waterfront is very unique compared to, say, I think of our nearest neighbor, Port of Tacoma. And I was at Washington American Planning Association chapter conference, annual conference last weekend. I was fortunate enough to go on a tour of the Port of Tacoma. And after touring all of the marine terminals, both the container terminals as well as the break bulk terminals, we have a really niche marine terminal down here with break bulk. It's of all of the square miles, 727 square miles of Thurston County, we have 65 acres in Thurston County dedicated to the marine terminal. And
How many square miles? I like that.
727 square miles for Thurston County. So very unique opportunities. So Mike and I have been having conversations about historic plans and planning and looking at how the marine terminal interfaces with the urban waterfront. And this is a real opportunity for the community at large to take a step back and say, really, how should this work? How could we expand downtown Olympia and align it with the port's mission with economic development and being able to better move people and goods by sea, land, and air. So what's out? We're proposing, do we really want to reopen Vision 2050 and Destination Waterfront? Those were like deeply involved community engagement processes that pulled together a variety of stakeholders, and your predecessors approved and adopted those plans, and they're still, we believe they're still current. Okay, so we're laying down the tracks for planning opportunities, and I'm going to walk you through what I believe are the 7 tracks. If we were to create like a checklist for what to do for a sub area plan, these what I believe are the 7 tracks. And we're not saying we're just going to go out and do this. We want your input on this. We want community input on this. So this is just really kind of an exercise and a discussion of what are those areas we should be looking at with the Port Peninsula. The first is community engagement. How do we want to engage people meaningfully and transparently? Market and economic analysis. What makes sense for future land use and activities that would take place on the Port Peninsula over the next 10 to 20 years? Visualizing that land use framework. So how is that going to take form, and how does that not only align with the port's development guidelines for your port districts, but with the City of Olympia's development and design guidelines? Marine terminals in the business of shipping freight, looking at reconfiguring or evaluating that marine terminal, and what is the long-term need going to be, and how can we safely move trucks and freight through downtown Olympia to the Port of Olympia. So looking at overall mobility, not just for trucks and trains, but for people, active transportation as well. Utilities and infrastructure, how do we meet future demand for power, water, sewer, and managing stormwater? And then I think the big one here is environmental review. As Mike said early in the presentation, the current environmental impact state is really out of date. And if we're taking a really comprehensive look, really, I think doing that environmental review on the bookends, on the range of possibilities for what type of development can be here is not only a responsible thing to do, it's what your constituents in the community is demanding that you do. And then lastly, climate resilience and environmental stewardship. This is building off of the work of the Olympia Sea Level Rise Response Plan, hazard mitigation opportunities, and the port's role as an environmental steward. So track 1, community engagement. Of all of the tracks we have, this is a given. You got to do this. You got to go out and engage the community. And the deliverable here is really getting meaningful input that's going to shape and build long-term support for what the recommendations are going to be that are the outcome of this plan. And so TRPC, as Allison said, our expertise is setting the table, convening stakeholders, bringing together the communities, tribes, neighborhoods, and stakeholders early in the process. We think that the type of outreach we do really needs to be equitable and centered on inclusiveness and looking at who is going to really be most impacted by this planning process and future development. Using plain language and then having a feedback loop so that the questions we pose to the public and the feedback they give us, we want to make sure that their feedback is responded to and is reflected in what you're setting out to do, and making it easy for people to participate. So whether that's through little polls, surveys, doing online interactive story maps that tell a story that show visuals and people can see the properties, as well as like, I think it's really important to have visualizations like these up here, really 3D renderings. What is this gonna look like? How might people be interacting with these spaces? All right, so the port is into economic development. We need to figure out what is the possible absorption of future land use? What is the demand for square footage and acreage and the types of uses? And when will those types of uses really need to come into play? When would they phase in? Is this, is it gonna really happen in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? You have a statement, you have a solicitation of interest out for site D right now. You're gonna continue doing business as this planning process is going on. We're gonna learn from that and incorporate and link that up with these studies. But we wanna have an understanding of what are those types of uses that can be used on the urban waterfront? And what are potential long-term uses for the marine terminal? You have a lease with Weyerhaeuser for log storage and operations, but long-term, I believe it's in the port's interest to look at diversifying what that marine terminal could be used for. And so looking at not only the types of industrial and light industrial uses that may be on the port, but maybe there's also some opportunity to look at that eastern edge of the port along Marine View Drive to see, is there a better way to buffer or transition land uses along that marine terminal to make it just more approachable and human scale? Urban waterfront, a lot of work has been put into Destination 2050. The surveys from that, people said they want access to the water. They want like cultural destination hubs, museums, things like that. We want to continue building off of that work that's been done. I think most importantly here is for the port to have a better sense of what is going to be the demand and the growth for future jobs, tax revenue, and what this all might cost the port to develop what the supporting infrastructure needs are to develop that. The deliverable here is a market land use program, like sort of a matrix by district and by phase with all of this information.
Oh, before you go
Yes.
back on that last slide, I will just add, some of this work the previous consultant did initiate, and we do have some of this information. So what we'll be looking is not replicating previous work, but folding in the content that was created by the previous consultant where and when it makes sense to be able to do so. So it is not just a throw everything away and start over. It is incorporate what makes sense into what we can. But we may still find that there are gaps of information that we're missing from previous analysis. So we do want to do that. The other thing, and Paul made a really good point, just because we are in the planning process, it does not mean we stop being opportunistic. No organization works that way. No organization goes, we're in a 2-year planning process, so nobody pick up the phone. Everybody still answers the phone. We still move forward when there is an opportunity in front of us. What we do with that is we make sure it folds into this process, and it also can inform this process. I think having market realities to inform your market analysis is the right way to do an economic sort of piece. I've watched so many times where people will do a market analysis, but they didn't actually engage the private sector that would be doing the work. And so they come out with a vision, and then the private sector who they're trying to attract goes, that's not viable. I can't build that thing or do that thing. So I like the idea that we're still answering the phone as we're moving through this and still taking advantages of opportunities should they arise during the process. Yeah.
I'm already seeing basic governance and facilitation skill set that we did not previously see on this, so thank you. And in that, yes, despite my big expression about the scope of work taking that long to navigate, I think I want to make sure we have these understandings for community engagement of what our ground rules are, what's in, what's out, how we plan to leverage the engagement. If I could influence this at all, I see you put that at track 1. And the sooner we can kind of start to get get some of those principles aligned and out there so people understand how they are going to be invited to engage, that they didn't miss it, right? This has just been really on hold, and how they can touch to it, the better. And then I'd like us to consider, I think we should set up a web page so that things like even this first slideshow, which I don't think is posted under the commission meeting, but the slideshow and any of the foundational documents, because we are going to then have to take this through for years. We need to have a place where we don't have a broken circle again, and people can go and refer to as the project continues. So if that would, I encourage you, Mike, to think, is that in the scope of work with TRPC to support it, or you're gonna get there?
I have a list of
think-
questions in my office that Mike and I need to go through
Yeah.
about,
We,
of this nature.
yeah, we did do that with the Newmark
We
Industrial Campus Master Planning.
Mhm.
TRPC actually
We
hosted
hosted
it on their site. So that people understood what TRPC's role was a little. So we had a page on on the port site that directed, TRPC is leading this effort, and it directed to a TRPC hosted site. And I think you guys kept that
Yeah, it
page
was-
up for like
it was
8
up-
years.
It was up for a few years.
It wasn't up to, when I started looking for
Yes.
information, right?
Yeah, we transitioned it to the port, I want to say maybe in 2018 or something like
Yeah.
that.
And just to piggyback on that, I feel that there's been massive amounts of robust process, especially on the broad community engagement questions. So tailoring we need to be clear with our messaging of, we are going to ask you this question. We aren't asking you every question again, because we already spent a lot of the public's money to do those public processes, and we have great work product because it was really broad. I mean, they literally stood at grocery stores, and the Vision 2050 process was impressive.
TRPC was part of the Vision 2050. We assisted with the community outreach, and I remember standing at the county fair as people came in and
I mean, that
Can't
is,
be carried in like the June 2022
Right.
commission meeting. It has to be in a place where someone can go
Sure.
and feel that.
Yes.
yeah, and so just as we're communicating with the public about how we're gonna engage them, just being clear that this isn't redoing everything.
And very.
I know you're already saying that, I just felt like I had to say it.
that first slide I showed you about what's in, what's out is trying to like put the guardrails around the project and how we're gonna frame this up.
Commissioner Montana, did you have more that you wanted to add?
No, thank you.
Okay. Just wanted to-
I actually do.
Okay.
Just because we're talking heavily about the community engagement now, I want to give you a little context of why this has come up now, because I've not said this before, and when I've been asked before about what my vision for the peninsula would be, I've always said that my vision is really not important. It's what we decide on as a group, which includes the community. But here recently, there's a new group that just formed, and it's a group of executives that manage tribal enterprises. And they asked me to come and talk to them at their first seminar, talk to them about ports and relationships between ports and tribal governments and enterprises. So when I was doing research to go and talk to them, I learned a lot about the relationship between the Puyallup tribe and the Port of Tacoma. Because in Tacoma, at the Port of Tacoma in about 1990, they had a big project that they were getting ready to break ground on. And the Puyallup tribe came in and put a grinding halt to it.
Hmm.
And it was because the land that they were, even though it belonged to the port, it was the tribe's usual and accustomed area where they had grown up in time immemorial, and they were able to put a stop to that project. It eventually did go ahead and go through, but the moral of the story is what they learned from this is the communication, how important the communication is, and the communication has to start early. It has to start at the very beginning. Now you look at the relationship between Puyallup and the Port of Tacoma, they work very well together. In fact, they're partnering on several partners. So I would like to suggest when we're talking to community engagement, the very first thing we need to do is bring in the Squaxin Island tribe. Because this Port Peninsula is their history. I mean, the port has a 100-year history here on the peninsula and with all of the industry, but you look deeper into the history, and this is a critical part to the history. And I just believe that the tribe needs to be pulled in early before we're ever talking about permits or anything like that. You know, and I know that the peninsula has been altered and reconfigured over the years. It looks much different than it probably did 150 years ago, but still there's a lot of history there. And I really believe now that we need to consider that historical preservation. And I think the Squaxin Island tribe should be a big partner in that.
Front and center.
Yes, for front and center.
We
Absolutely.
completely agree. And one last thing before we move off of this and continue, your point, and it's such a fair point of, here you were running for Port Commission, and there were decisions that had been made and documents that had been adopted, but understanding, were these things relevant? Had they been folded in? How are they guiding the port? They were not clearly presented at that time. I think if you look at our comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements, which is supposed to be really one of the port's primary land use planning and long-range planning document, it doesn't say anything about Vision 2050 in it right now. It doesn't say anything about Destination Waterfront right now. We never adopted organizationally, we never adopted the Newmarket Industrial Campus and master plan. So there were these planning exercises that occurred that didn't get folded in to the primary existing document. What we are working on right now is, how do we make sure that mistake doesn't happen again, that they get formalized and codified correctly, so that future generation of staff isn't having to go back and watch a Port Commission meeting from 2021 to determine did they adopt that or not. And so we're really conscious right now of the final product has to be so formally forward and incorporated into the port's primary required. To have a comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements is required of all ports in Washington state. That's where these decisions need to be reflected and live. And so that's the goal.
And I heard that from so many constituents that we had done planning that sat on a shelf.
Yeah.
And so doing this planning now, as long as it doesn't sit on a shelf, it has to really inform what we do, has to be integrated, and it has to last 20 years. Well, as it evolves, because it's going to be an entirely new set of commissioners and staff who are here when we start to really get off the ground with some of this work. And that's the thing that's a little frustrating, right? But it's like planting an oak tree.
Yes.
I'll move on. I just wanted to come back to here. Yeah, tracks 2 through 5, work has been done by some of your current consultants. And so we want to be able to evaluate that. Look for the gaps, look at where there's strengths and what needs additional work. Okay, track 3, land use scenarios. This is about building off and incorporating those decisions from destination waterfront planning, as well as looking at some of your historic plans and thinking, where does this fit into our existing conditions and planning efforts? But this is, I think, where a lot of public process has an opportunity to get engaged. This is when we start to really visualize what form that this land use is going to start to look like. Where the building's going to go, how many stories are those buildings, what are the types of uses? Those renderings you see, like the farmer's market illustration behind John there, that shows people interacting with that space. That's really key. But making sure that what is being visualized and what those opportunities are going to align with City of Olympia design and development codes and regulations.
And one more thing, I mean, Commissioner Harding could make this point better than me, but so go ahead after I do. we also don't have, we're not gonna use taxpayer money to build these things. Like, we don't have $100 million sitting aside, so we're going to need private partners. To that end, if we're designing a plan that private partners aren't going to see as accessible, or like, there has to be a moment early for some input of where the market can chip in. Have you thought about that? Because that's one of the hardest things about Port Work. It's like government, but it's also not government, or it's leveraging private sector. So it's different than when Thurston County designs its new courthouse or something.
That's, not to answer for you guys, but it seems to me that would be why we would have a very diverse group of stakeholders who would be consulted through this process, because it would be, we'd have to have not only the tribe, but business organizations, environmental organizations, and I agree. We have to have confidence that the plan is going to actually work.
I would, you want me to respond?
Well, I'll add to, it's why track 2 right before was the economic analysis. It's,
Oh, I see. So you think that will be done first?
it's not, these aren't necessarily
No, they're
in
not in
order.
order.
These are
Yeah.
not in order. These are areas of information
They would
gathering.
be integrated.
So to your point, we have to make sure in track 2, if you want to pop it back one, market and economic analysis. To your point, the market has to be able to validate our design plans. Otherwise, again, they'll sit on a shelf. If no one goes, if we do a land use plan, we take it to the private sector for the opportunities that we're gonna need the private sector to do, and they go, that is the most pie in the sky thing, I would never get financed to be able to do that, then it's a pointless land use plan. Unless we want to somehow not do it or attempt to do it ourselves, which we don't really have the depth of finance to be able to do that. So this track 2 informs 3 and 3 informs 2.
Well, and I think as far as how the commission, the challenge with some of these is you look at it and you go, oh, cool, okay. We could build a hotel there, we could build a boatworks thing there, cool. And what I think would be helpful for the commission is having kind of a choose your own adventure of, okay, if you want to prioritize tourism, environmental stewardship, and access to the water, you go down this fork in the road. Okay, if you need to reinvest real estate dollars, and you can do this. If you want to leverage if you want to do a tax levy, you can do this. If you want to leverage the private sector, you can do this. Because the values of the commission are going to change over the course of this time that this is going to unfold. But how do you pick up the plan and still go, with my values, I want to execute on parcel A, and do that to me would be useful. So it's not just a bunch of hypotheticals. It gives more context to the hypothetical, which I think is what everyone is saying is if it doesn't work in the private sector, fine, then you need to come up with public funding to do it. And if the commission thinks that's enough of a priority, then great. It's not that anything is a no, but how do we get to yes? I mean, these guys are sick of me saying that, but how do we get to yes? Because otherwise we just look at plans.
And what's parcel specific versus like part of the portfolio of what we're looking for? So I mean, I know members of our advisory committee and members of the public who they see specific places like the KGY building and they go, oh, I know what I would want to do right there. But I know that I'm not an architect and a land use architect and a planner. And so there's the whole set of things we'd want to try to do, and maybe the private sector would direct what goes in which specific spot a little bit. Like, so I just wonder how you integrate having, the plan will say sort of the max heights and things like that, but it won't say which thing happens in which place, or will it? Because I think earlier we had something that was pretty specific about uses and different.
That's a great question. I think that you have to build in flexibility. I mean, as an example, I would look at this old one, this one that says planning districts, and it does show buildings on there. There is no scenario in any universe where the exact size of the building gets built exactly in the location of a plan that got passed years earlier. It's not gonna happen. You can even see in there, they identified where they thought the farmer's market building should be, and it's not where the farmer's market building actually ended up being. I think that you have to create some district, that's why I think districting does work. You can
The
give.
portfolio standard almost for your district.
Yes, so you're looking for this district, these are the kinds of uses, this is kind of maybe the design element.
We did that.
We have done that. We haven't done that since 1995.
Destination waterfront.
That's part of it. Destination
right.
Waterfront did a part of it. You haven't done it for the marine. Look, for example, that 1991 plan shows 3 districts inside the marine terminal. Now we have 1 to serve every need. I don't know if that's the right layout any longer.
I wondered, so you're saying the Admiral and Northern don't exist, they're part of the marine?
They got folded into the marine terminal.
Because I saw that and I was like, oh, good.
It's kind of
that
interesting.
helps us, yeah.
Yeah, so it may be we're looking back and going, maybe they got it right in 1995. I don't know. But looking at when we talk about uses and the things that we want, for example, Paul and I went through Vision 2050. There are 59 action items within that plan that was passed. One of the action items for the marine terminal that was in there was explore value added manufacturing that can support the marine terminal. Great. Where? Where in that district would you want to locate something like that? Because if you
Where we want the electric ferry ships to be built.
Sure, we have some ideas, but if that's where you want it, do you have the infrastructure included in that location? Is the transportation layout identified to meet that need? Are the utilities there? Those are the kinds of questions that we're not saying specifically. The footprint is specifically 80 by 100 and it is in this location. We will not go that granular. But we will go potentially district by district, and we may even say, hey, some of the districts that we have now, maybe you're gonna move the boundaries, or maybe there's a district that we don't have that we need or want because the goals have changed. So I think that that's more in the realm. I don't think it's at the granular specificity of.
Well, and setting it up so that when a new commission is formed, you can follow the process, which is part of the problem, right? Is there's all this fracturing of the information, but I can go, oh, there were 2 studies on building a hotel on parcel A. The city of Olympia wants us to improve connectivity between downtown and the peninsula. Destination master plan says they want a hotel. Everyone is telling us to do something with tourism. Oh, look, we have a place. We as a commission collectively could very easily move that forward. But I don't see how it's integrated to a tool to the commission. That's where the planning process is. How do we make it a tool for future commissions?
I do think
We are already doing that, but what?
Want a commissioner's playbook?
It's really a public playbook. It's for the
I mean,
whole.
I think we think of this is the medium scale. As you've said, there's been a lot of work at that high level vision. Here are things we want, here are the big goals that we want to achieve. And we don't want to get super prescriptive. Here's exactly what needs to happen at every location, because that's not going to be supported. You need support for the creativity of developers and other folks to come in and decide. But this is to be the interim of say, okay, we're taking that vision. What's feasible with what we have and what do we need to make that achievable? And that's kind of with those different scenarios. Right now, there's a lot of things that people want, but how exactly is that fitting within the geometry of the real world in this, limited location? Like, where are those limits of what we can do and what we can't do? So this planning is that kind of middle bar between, the high level goals and someone specifically coming in saying, this is exactly what we're planning to do. And that's kind of how it can help bridge that gap.
And I will say, Mike called out some language the previous commission used when it adopted Destination Waterfront. It said basically, this is what we expect the staff to use to go solicit proposals to bring back to the commission for consideration. And that's what we're doing.
And there are proposals from private developers to build a hotel. Those have happened. but those,
Okay.
that's not being socialized.
I know that, but none of us know that.
And I only know that because I know one of them. You know what I mean? So that's, but this isn't anyone's fault. We're doing the right thing. I'm just saying that in 2 years, when the waterfront center building is already built and you're, but when you're coming with the planning processes for the commission, this is being, you can say, okay, guys, you did good on parcel D. What's the next thing that we're gonna look at? Oh, I see that this commission really cares about X. Great, the data would say that you should focus on this. You know what I mean? How does it, that,
When an opportunity comes up.
yes,
That's the thing.
totally.
There'll be different opportunities
Yes.
over 20 years, and so you can, you have a plan that says, okay, well, this situation has arisen.
Totally.
How do we address it? Well, here's where we have opportunities with what we've laid out.
I think too,
You could go, oh,
I
God.
was just gonna say, I think one of the slides
Yeah.
Paul showed said that there's a prioritization built in as well. So if we don't have offers, but the commission thinks this is what we really should focus on, there's an opportunity to identify that. Sorry.
I think under this land use scenario, we want to create the bookends. What are the ranges? What are the levels of intensities or the tiers of the types of development that are gonna occur in the districts?
That one says RV resort, Mike.
Yeah, that's.
I'm just kidding.
It's filler
Mark started twitching.
from destination waterfront.
Sorry, we've belabored this, but I do want to add one sort of thing. The other option in this is you just exclusively defer to the City of Olympia zoning. And anything that is allowed in City of Olympia zoning is allowed on our property.
That's kind of
I
how we
will-
did the Tumwater
I-
parcels.
And I would
And I
tell
don't
you,
like that.
I would tell you, you will end up with things on your property. If you don't create this guidance of what our vision is, and you just let the zoning designation that the city has, there's some really peculiar things allowed in the urban waterfront zoning that I would not recommend go on port property. So what we're trying to do is create.
Mhm.
Yeah, so there are things that I do think that we want to be strategic and think about, well, we've already made this kind of investment. How do we leverage it? And what would we use? We've got a Boatworks that's here. I wouldn't put something completely unrelated to Boatworks next to Boatworks when you've already made that investment, as an example. Maybe you do, but I think we all understand it. Let's,
Paul, on track 4, one of the, so much of what we do at the port is based on sort of some level of information and belief, but without being able to go back to the source information. A lot of us have heard conversation about the marine terminals supporting having a deep water harbor and the value of that in an emergency management scenario. I've seen references to a Cascadia rising planning, but just in a sort of big earthquake, sort of big situations, why this is really valuable to the community. I think that sort of would that kind of analysis, if it exists somewhere, be part of what you're pulling together? And if so, is it under this, or is there a different track we're documenting kind of similar to, like, we have a Boatworks and it has this value? What, just getting to the bottom of whether that's real, like
Yeah, the contingency operations that would play out.
contingency, is that in the mobility and freight?
It's not, but it can, I mean, it can be. It just depends on how far, what it is you want answered. I don't have it expressly called out in this presentation. I've heard many conversations in Thurston County over the years about the importance of the marine terminal and the seaport, or contingency operations should say parts of I-5 be completely destroyed or taken out, and we need to bring things in. Same with the Olympia Regional Airport. There are a lot of factors.
I would like to assemble whatever factual background there is about those two things as part of this work, not the airport, but the marine terminal, because if we're looking at it, we're including it. And we need to understand, are we trying to, what are we trying to maintain as a service that we already have? Is that not what you thought, Mike?
no, I think that there is something in there that,
We-
yeah, I almost look at it, this is a land use plan, even I mean, the question that you're asking is almost a county-wide land use sort of thing. What are the infrastructure needs that the county of Thurston County needs? There currently is only one location to take heavy things from water side and put them on land and take heavy, or vice versa. There's only one spot in all of Thurston County to do that, and it's there. Does that have a strategic value to Thurston County? I get a little nervous of folding that question into this effort. Because I think your Vision 2050 asked and answered that question.
Oh, yes, okay. Well, so I would then just write it down for someone's on staff's homework because I really need the substantiation of that. I don't want to go around saying this without knowing
Sure. Where it comes from.
in our emergency planning where I can.
Got it.
I leave that to you. I get it. If you think that's out of scope.
Do you want historical when it has been used
No.
or in the future, how it would be used?
Just as part of whatever countywide emergency planning ops, like what they count on these.
I think that you could, I
think
mean, the
my-
track is.
Yeah, and I think Thurston County's comprehensive emergency management plan, I believe, probably cites the port terminal as a critical asset. Now,
Where it would come from.
but the question of the feasibility of it and access to the port when roads are going to, the whole
That's what I-
transportation network be disrupted is another like whole set of analysis. So what I just want to point out here is depending on what the land use scenarios are, what the types of land uses you're gonna have is gonna determine what types of trips are gonna be generated, what trips are gonna be produced from these facilities, what's gonna attract in terms of not just freight, but people coming for jobs, people coming to visit the area. So what are those trip generations gonna be based on that land use, development type? TRPC has some expertise in that with our travel demand model to be able to say what that is. Knowing what those trips are, looking at intersections, how are intersections gonna perform in terms of level of service, vehicles getting through in periods of time. As well as understanding what safety conflicts there might be, say, between truck traffic and someone riding their bike. So knowing what those countermeasures are. So having the deliverables really looking at that whole transportation network, what planned improvements might be needed. That's something within the port's purview is to look at those types of utility and transportation investments to attract development and knowing what can be done and perhaps going after grants to implement some of those projects. But beyond just freight and mobility, I think there's the whole sustainability side of that with reducing idling and diesel emissions and possibilities for electrification and planning for that as well.
One thing that came up, we've talked about an amphitheater and we've talked about some sort of sports facility on North Point. And then one thing that came up with the previous architect was moving Marine Drive so that it's not up against the fence for a more integrated experience from a user perspective. But I'm curious the routing of it for the types of traffic that a larger event space. And then I'm also curious, I don't know where this fits in, about noise for our residents that are, when we have had events on North Point, they make noise. What types of uses are workable in that sense and which aren't?
Is there a design way that can abate those concerns?
Exactly. So chicken egg, I guess I don't know how that works in your process of what if we move the road? What if we have two roads?
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Like transportation, understanding what the demand is gonna be for power, water supply, stormwater management, stormwater treatment, just having a good, and as well as internet broadband needs. Looking where there's opportunities for regional stormwater facilities. Again, this might be an area that the port can leverage and plan for where those regional stormwater facilities, maybe build them in advance, knowing if you're gonna have a high likelihood of development occurring on certain paths on certain parcels.
Oh, did you make this slide yourself?
I made the slide, I did not make that graphic.
Do you like it?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had that basic confidence, that's all, of making that graphic.
Oh. And so then, yeah, integrating resilience measures and what I mean, like with the sea level rise response plan. Thomas Architecture Studios did some of this with Destination Waterfront, looking at, what needs to be engineered, but where also are those sort of bioengineered or natural opportunities that could be effective mitigation strategies for things like coastal flooding or sea level rise.
I would be remiss, given the hard work of someone in this room, not to raise that there are stakeholders who have talked about restoration as being a goal, restoration of the waterfront being distinct from mitigation and remediation and
For habitat,
sea level rise.
habitat restoration and things like that.
And I've also heard that it may have less value in a place like here at the tip of the sound than it does when you do restoration in the open areas. Anyway, is there a place where we'll be considering that level, or is that outside the scope as well?
Are you talking about retreat?
Like buffer zones?
No, I'm talking about, as we're talking about designing, if you go back to the picture, this is the waterfront interface of the Port Peninsula, the waterfront district.
Oh, that's way back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just the idea of or what sort of interface are you trying to have with the water?
I think your question, so I look at how Percival Landing was rebuilt over here, where there was some design and intention of using living shoreline and some restoration work. Is that kind of what you're?
Yeah, and where does that, I guess maybe in track 7, where you talked about stewardship as sort of its own thing. Maybe that's where we would
Yeah.
look at that.
Yes, that can be, but I also think you raised the question about reconfiguring View Drive and the types of events that are gonna happen. What are the impacts of noise, air quality, traffic, et cetera? That's where the environmental review process comes into play, is looking at these bookend scenarios and what are going to be the impacts from the types of development activity that could occur on the Port Peninsula and getting a better understanding of that. So what are the impacts and what are some of the strategies to counter those impacts, the mitigation itself?
And are we including the parcel right at the tip there of
Like North Point?
Very northern.
No, the water that's reaches in on the left, not West Bay, but East Bay?
Highlands.
Yeah, does the parcel, does the waterfront parcel, see the parcel right there that's at the bottom of that planning district parcel, is that part of it? Okay, the old map, there's a.
State Avenue?
State Avenue District?
Yeah.
No, we
that's
don't.
not- We're saying that's out, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that is
Sorry.
largely,
Looking on the north end.
Sorry, yeah, trying to.
So,
yeah, that, I think that we have scoped this project that
That's
is more or less a finished district.
Is that all Children's Museum and?
Yeah,
That's East Bay.
there's the port went through a planning exercise that built the roads. I don't think any, and built the curbs, gutters, sidewalks, street trees and all the infrastructure. There are just 2 finished pads left there. So I don't think that we thought to include that into this. That was the intention. It's a finished product.
Just seeing it from this perspective.
I just want to do a time check, just because I know we have a SEPA policies conversation after this, and so if we could wrap up maybe in 10 minutes, will that give you guys enough time? Or 5?
Take how much time you need.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
okay. So I'm gonna look at the 3 people sitting across the room from me. They're much more versed in the State Environmental Policy Act than I am, and most of TRPC is. But what Mike and I and the conversations I've had with other port staff is this opportunity to form a planned action EIS. This is a document that under those bookend scenarios identifies those range of land use opportunities, maybe what a preferred alternative is, but looking at what all the environmental impacts are for a sub area. In this case, the sub area or neighborhood is the Port Peninsula. So this would be doing all of the, unlike now where a project will come in and that project may need to do an EIS. This is looking at this would do the environmental impact in advance for the entire properties in question, the Port Peninsula. And so what this would do would help streamline the permitting processes, whereby if a project is included and it conforms with what's in the planned action EIS, when Olympia has a proposal on in their permitting office and reviewing it, that project, if it conforms with it, would not have to do an independent environmental impact statement.
And how do we do that without being overly prescriptive in what's being built? How do we, I thought that was one of the.
I'm not sure, having never actually myself done a action.
And I can't answer that directly, but there are communities that have done this. An example I can point you to is the Port of Bellingham and the City of Bellingham have done a planned action EIS.
Homewater is embarking on one for the brewery district.
Okay.
So we will find out more and share that.
And if folks, Olympia completed one for the Capitol Mall Triangle project, so that locally is a recent example of one that was completed. So they're increasingly, I think folks are looking at them as a way to help provide that certainty upfront. And it doesn't, it puts, again, boundaries around what the expectations are. And if you have development that comes in that's outside of those boundaries, then it would need to go through the additional review that's needed. But for anything that where you've already done the legwork on it, it means people can move forward.
And it's to help avoid piecemealing
Yeah.
concerns about. And so this looks at all of the potential impacts from the whole, all of them constantly on.
Part of the challenge with this approach is the city has permitting authority. So they review the project. So unlike, say, a city or a county doing a planned action EIS, all of the project approval rests with them. So for it to be enacted here, City of Olympia would need to adopt a planned action ordinance. And that's a significant amount of work. And so what we would need to explore with the city and early on is what that would take. And it may even require upfront in this process, even maybe an interlocal agreement between the city and the port to align that partnership, to understand what the intent is and move forward together in tandem to collaborate on such an effort.
Could we have a goal by second quarter of next year that will have answered that question, whether we're trying to do an ordinance with the city ultimately, you know, whether that's where we're headed?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That
We could even bring you an ILA by then.
yeah, I think that is a critical piece that needs an answer sooner than
Right.
later. So in this scoping exercise, the outreach and engagement from a staff to staff level with the city of Olympia to understand staff capacity to be able to take something like this on right now will be a conversation.
And that is a big unknown right now. So that is something on our list to look into.
And you know, so you mentioned touring Port of Tacoma. I mean, our small little area here is so central to our city. It is just in the part and parcel of what the city of Olympia is. So I think it's very important.
I think it's important to the city of Olympia.
Mhm.
So then, the deliverable with this would be the environmental review and a planned action EIS and the whole permitting framework in a way for both the Port of Olympia and the city of Olympia to be able to monitor that as development takes place and see how it conforms and continue to update that EIS as necessary. And then lastly, the track is climate resiliency and stewardship, and this is looking for those opportunities to integrate the sea level rise response plan. You were saying about, well, could the marine terminal be used for contingency operations in the event of an emergency? I mean, that is something, maybe it's not within the scope of this, but I
Hazard mitigation.
think long-term, are those bursts gonna be there with Cascadia magnitude 9 earthquake? I don't know. What seismic studies has the port performed to know how liquefaction is gonna impact the resiliency of that system, plus all the roads leading from I-5 out to the Port of Olympia. Opportunities to incorporate green infrastructure, stormwater, low impact development, making buildings more energy efficient. Potential deliverable as part of this is a resilience and sustainability strategy. So we know PRPC, we don't have all the expertise, port staff doesn't have all the expertise. We need to bring professional services on consultants to help with some of that work I've described from you from the tracks. What we need to do is go through what work has been done to identify really where the need is, but that's to bring in that specialized support to provide that subject matter expertise where we need it. So next steps, PRPC staff will be reaching out with you in coordination. I'll be coordinating with Mike to talk about how we can interview with the commissioners, and if in some situations it's maybe advantageous to have a couple commissioners partner up, we're open to that idea. Also, doing interviews with City of Olympia staff about the planned action EIS, and sort of that's a goal, is to have that done by second quarter. We need to start those conversations now. Ongoing document research and review. PRPC building that scope of work it and budget and consultation with board staff, and bringing something back to you for your review and consideration, follow-up discussion on second quarter next year.
Would that scope then have a clearly defined community engagement strategy as part of it?
I think we can do that. Yeah. Okay, so we had 3 discussion questions up front. I think we're low on time, and we didn't have an expectation that you were going to get to these, and we've had a very robust conversation. But again, just to sort of plant the ideas for you to be prepping for subsequent conversations with us, is what will define success and readiness for implementation. We've already talked about like a community port commissioner playbook, that would be something that you would like to have to know if you're going to go down one type of path of land use, how would you get there? Question 2, how should the plans and policies of the port that you've already adopted guide this work? I think we're hearing pretty clearly tonight that the Vision 2050 and Destination Waterfront were very seminal and important documents supported by the community that those are framing, but we want you to give some thought to that. What additional policies or initiatives should inform this planning process, and maybe what's off limits? And third, what outcomes matter most for the Port Peninsula Master Plan, like those priorities? What is it you really want to see in here that gets developed, and what aspects of the planning process are important? So that concludes our presentation. Thank you for your meaningful and impactful conversation and your curiosity. You've given us some ideas. We appreciate that. You know where to find us.
Thank you.
So we will work on scheduling those interview times shortly.
And by way of segue, I think we'll probably have to schedule another time in addition if we start a tiny bit on the environmental policy updates. But I'm sure that this policy will want to have that integrated into the work of the waterfront. Thank you. So I see we have Commissioner Montano is going to have a town hall today at 6, so we're probably going to need a break. So would you like to take 5 minutes just to introduce this issue, but we'll have to put it on the next agenda? Even is there any reason we couldn't put it on the next meeting agenda to continue the conversation that we start here? We don't have to wait for a work session slot.
Yeah, good. October 27th.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Sean Gilbertson, Director of Environmental Planning and Programs here at the Port. And what we've been doing since our last meeting, we had a work session a few months back that talked about environmental policies of the and the need to update them and create some new policies. So we've heard the commission. We understand that responding to climate change and strengthening our resilience against climate change and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions are important to the commission and the community. So what we want to describe, and what we will in our next meeting, is our progress on updating those policies. So what you'll see is a draft climate change policy that we put together. We studied a lot of other ports and a lot of other climate policies to help put together kind of a base policy. And it will really be, it's just a briefing. It's not asking for any decision, and we'll want the input from the commissioners to see if we're on the right track and to see what other items you want included. In addition to the draft climate change policy, we also have a draft sustainability plan. And really the climate change policy will reference the sustainability plan, which will be more of our working document that we can update more frequently. As well, you will see a couple documents that we partnered with the Nisqually Indian Tribe to do an electrification of our fleet analysis. So we're really looking to, in a systematic way, transition to more electric vehicles, better infrastructure for charging those vehicles and that kind of thing. Additionally, we did a solar feasibility analysis as part of the same grant with the Nisqually Indian Tribe. So we'll present information from both of those. They will inform how we're going to electrify things here at the port moving forward, how we're going to reduce our carbon footprint. Additionally, we'll talk a little bit more about how our sea level rise response will fit into that and how we're implementing the sea level rise response plan. So there'll be a lot coming at you, and we'll share that information with you and ask for your input to make sure that we're on the right track.
Thank you. We did have the chance to review the materials in preparation for today. I want to invite Commissioner Montano, really led a lot of this, the drive for this work. And just in case you're not at the next meeting, if you wanted to say anything about what you're looking for or happy to see.
No, I didn't have anything.
You're
to
all
share.
good. Okay. So, Commissioner Sanders.
Oh, I'm really excited about it. I know that was one of the important things that I wanted to bring to the board is looking at climate change and how we can look at electrification and reducing our carbon footprint. I was super eager about the EPA Ports Grant, even though we're kind of behind, on that whole thing, but it's exciting to see the, momentum and the work that you're putting into our goals and visions.
Our other two commissioners, we'll have this.
Well, I'll just say I'm happy, and I know you've been doing work with the Nisqually Tribe, and I think just to stick with my theme tonight, working with the tribes is a very important thing, especially when it comes to the environmental policy and making sure our policies align with their efforts to restore the salmon runs and that sort of thing. So I was good. I brought this so I could just show you this. This is the Nisqually Tribe's comprehensive climate action plan that they spent a couple of years putting this together. They have a similar environmental plan, and I think if we could work towards something like this.
Do you have that or?
Sure. Yeah, I can get another one, sure.
A couple of things real quick. We hope to use those analyses that we did for fleet electrification and solar feasibility to help put us in a position to get those grants, to go after the money that's coming out for climate change. And I should also acknowledge that John is really doing a lot of the legwork here and helping put together the climate change policy and the sustainability plan. So we're really looking forward to engaging with the commission on those things.
I would just have one thing to urge you to think about before you come in next time. There's sort of two levels. There's our own operations, right? Sort of look to the plank in your own eye, our leading by example in the emissions that we ourselves drive and how we can manage them. But there's also sort of how we can most effectively, if we're going to make investments, how we have the biggest benefit for the communities surrounding us who want to see environmental remediation. I had the good fortune of meeting recently with Sue Patnud from the Deschutes Estuary Restoration Team, and she assured me that Alex and the staff are working on are interested in supporting whole watershed type planning and investment. And so I will be curious, sort of, there's the operational, walk the walk with our operations, and then how we contribute to bigger efforts. And I'll be interested in reading the policies you brought forward to see if they help me answer those questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, that's a huge part of the plan is how we interact with partners regionally.
Well then, Thank you. We had great experts here today and great conversation. And if I look, I guess, do I need a motion to skip these two things for another time? Or do we just say we're out of time and we adjourn?
Ladder will work.
Okay, so by your lack of objection,